Hello, everyone. You are watching the Asian American Herald, a new media network. This show is being aired via live stream on Facebook, and a recording will be available afterwards at our Facebook page, Asian American Herald. My name is Himani Gupta Carlson, and I'm a professor at Empire State College in Saratoga Springs, New York, as well as a community-based farmer and writer. So our guest tonight is Dr. Khyati Joshi. Khyati is a professor of education at Fairleigh Dickinson University and the author of two books, New Roots in America's Sacred Ground, Religion, Race, and Ethnicity in Indian America, and White Christian Privilege, The Illusion of Religious Equality in America. The latter is newly hot off the presses. She also has co-edited numerous books and has written widely about the intersectionality of race and religion and social justice. Khyati, welcome to our show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Himani.
I'm so happy. And I just want to note this is 20 years that I've known you when we were roommates at one of the very first APARI gatherings.
That's right. That's right. A conference that means a great deal to both of us and a network of scholars that are doing great work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually wonder if you could begin by telling us a bit more about yourself. Where did you grow up and how have your experiences, first as a child of immigrant Hindu Indian parents and now as a parent, informed the research writing and the other kind of work that you do?
So I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and a brown little Hindu girl who did not fit in to at school or really anywhere outside of my Indian American community, which I'm very happy to say I had one growing up. At school, I faced a fair amount of harassment and bullying. And actually, it's really one of the reasons I do some of the work that I do now, which is in addition to what you stated and how you introduced me, I also do workshops for educators and administrators around anti-racism and social justice work. And there's a direct connection as to why I do that. I don't want kids to have to go through what I went through. And I want our education system to be more equitable for all. So I went on for college, majored in religion, and was really interested in the role of religion in people's lives. And it's from that lens that I wrote my first book and then even approached white Christian privilege, because I talk about not only my experience as an Indian American Hindu, but I also have stories in there from folks who are Muslim, from folks who are Native American, to highlight the white Christian privilege that exists. But the white Christian privilege, it's not just, we have to also see how it's embedded in our public policies and laws, because it's the institutional religious oppression that produces the privilege.
Yes, and we're going to talk more about your book in a bit, but I do want to say it's loaded, but it's loaded in a really easily accessible, highly readable manner. It's not, it's a very serious book, but it's not a difficult book. And at least it's not a difficult to read book. Maybe it's difficult on that heart level that you talk about towards the end, but I encourage everybody to go out and get a copy just as I have.
It's also available as an ebook like Kindle, and it's also available as an audiobook like on Audible.
Yeah, I almost bought the audiobook. I was actually thinking it would be so interesting to listen to it as I drive. I do a lot of driving, particularly on weekends for farmers markets, and I thought what a treat that would be to have that. So tell us, where we are is up in the capital region of New York, which is sort of quasi-urban, but also very, very rural, not necessarily as densely populated as some areas. So I was wondering, can you tell us a bit about where you live and how the community interactions that you've got have shaped the arguments you present, first in New Roots and then maybe in White Christian Privilege now?
Sure. So I live now in northern Jersey. I'm essentially a suburb of Manhattan, is the way I think of it. And there's no question that my lived experience has guided almost everything I've done. in addition to those two books. I am part of an interfaith and interracial family. So many Sunday mornings, well, before COVID it happened, you could find me in church in Montclair, New Jersey. So I consider myself a part of the Episcopalian community. I belong to St. John's. I do things there. And I'm Hindu, and I'm Hindu at church, so that guides my way of looking at this. And I'm really, my goal in writing this book and really in the work I do is to shed light on a lot of the structures that are invisible to many people and make them visible. Because when they're invisible and we can't see things, it's why we have people saying things today like, well, why are we still talking about civil rights? We had civil rights legislation passed in 1964. No, voting rights is not a problem. We had voting rights legislation in 1965. We know voting rights is a problem today, right? But we're not taught to see some of the structures that are there. But to many people, because of the fact that we weren't taught real United States history, most of us growing up in this country, until we get to college, if we're lucky, or graduate school, which was the situation for me, we just can't see those invisible structures. But once you start seeing the invisible, then you see it everywhere. And, I think folks are then compelled to try to make a more equitable society.
And it's amazing how you sort of guide readers through ways of seeing all of those structures, all of those things that are invisible, that are hidden, with my favorite phrase, are hidden in plain sight. I was actually just thinking today about work I do with food pantries and donating, and how I always think about it in terms of tithing. And then I'm like, that's a Christian concept. It's maybe a good Christian concept, but it's kind of, I find myself wondering if I'm blinded by that concept so thoroughly that I can't kind of articulate it in a different way.
Well, that can happen. And so the thing is, it's not that some things are right and some things are wrong. It's just about seeing what's considered normal, right? So using that language and using that vocabulary. I mean, for example, I was in high school and my teacher was trying to teach us simile and metaphor and things like that. And overall, English is not a class I did very well in high school. And so she was saying simile, metaphor, blah, 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 like in the Good Samaritan. And I didn't know what she was talking about, Himani. I didn't know what she was saying, but the way she said it, it was clear that everybody knows what she's talking about but me. And it was only later that I came to understand what it was, right? So that's a way Christian privilege kind of seeps into our world. And it's about understanding that with the diversity of folks that exist, not everybody's going to know how these things work, what they are. And so that's, one example. And then we have other examples that equate the Christian way of doing things with the normal way of doing things and the American way of doing things, right? And we have to be able to separate those.
Yeah, absolutely. I can keep talking, but I should probably move on. But one more thing. Yeah, I often sing songs when I'm out in the fields harvesting vegetables. And I realize that many of the songs that I sing are actually Christian hymns, because that's what I was taught. Those are the songs that, and I wasn't taught them in a church because I don't go to church. I was taught them in school at a young age, and it's just, it's amazing.
Right.
Yeah. So I want to turn to your first book, which was published in 2004.
2006, I think.
Okay, so a while ago, but
right.
Still, a while ago, but still quite, I think still quite relevant and compelling for the issues that we face. That book was actually very focused on Hindus,
yeah.
and Hindu American-born Indians who grew up in the Hindu faith, and it really offers a compelling analysis of how race and religion converge in racializing the Hindu Indian body and in subtly, or maybe not so subtly, leading some Hindu Indians to find spiritual solace in what might be like the opposite of, you know, highly proselytizing evangelical Christianity, which is highly proselytizing sort of monotheistically forced Hindutva version of Hinduism.
Mm.
And so I wonder if you could just kind of walk our viewers through some of that process and why it's problematic.
Well, I think first of all, the book had majority of Hindu research participants, but I do talk about Sikh, Muslim, and Christians, Indian American second generation folks in the book. And one of the things that I found, which was pretty clear, which is when folks were confronted with questions about Hinduism when they were in high school or in college, people went down one of two paths, you know. And when they encountered discrimination for being Hindu, or when they were asked about Hinduism in a pejorative way, they went down one of two paths. They either said, you know what, I am part of this very backwards religion and I don't understand it. And they just started kind of falling away, if you will, moving away from Hinduism. And the other, or they would be embarrassed, you know, and didn't want much to do with it and things like that. The other path was they wanted ammunition. They wanted to know. They wanted to learn so that they could give it back to these people who were, you know, trying to convert them, or, you know, whatever they were encountering regarding Hinduism that was negative. And so I think when you have experiences like that and they go down that path of wanting that identification and wanting support, when you find organizations that support you, you're going to go to that, right? I mean, most folks, especially during adolescence, are trying to figure out where they belong. And then if they find a place where they belong, they go, and then they start maybe learning the ideology. I think we have to understand that there are many second generation Hindus who are very involved with their faith, but that doesn't necessarily make them Hindutva. And that's an important distinction, right? There are many who are, which means they're identifying with right-wing ideology that comes out of India, that these days is a major part of the Indian government, you know, right? But I do want to make sure that distinction is there, that there are very pious and religious people today who identify as Hindu, and that does not mean they're necessarily Hindutva.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, one of the things that you often say at the academic conferences we attend is that you can't advocate for social justice without taking the importance of that role of religion in people's lives into account. And, you know, I always wonder how, as you're on the quest to learn more about your religion after you've been marginalized sort of by the Christian privilege and the Christian normativity that you discuss in this book,
Mm-hmm.
how do you learn to discern what is you know, again, I'm like falling into the trap of what is the real faith and what is the false faith. But how do you learn to make critical decisions about what you're learning as you're investigating?
Well, I'm not questioning someone's faith. It's not my place to do that. I'm trying to understand, and my goal has always been about understanding the role of religion in people's lives, and then how that affects our world, you know? And so that's what I'm seeking to understand. I will not question what is supposedly in someone's heart, and I take that very seriously. In my current book, in my newest book, I should say, in White Christian Privilege, I actually talk about Nikki Haley, because I'm taught one form of Christian privilege is, folks who are Christian and white and Christian can run for office without a problem, right? Their patriotism is not questioned. Their identity is not questioned as way like, well, I'm not sure if you can represent me, which is what, candidates who are religious and racial minorities often will encounter. And that happened to Nikki Haley when she was running in South Carolina. Her campaign received emails asking what religion Nikki Haley was, and things like, well, she's not a Christian. I'm not sure she can represent me. So eventually her website changed and there was a tab like Nikki Haley is a Christian, and that's what happens. Now, I'm not questioning what is in her heart and, why she converted. I'm just talking about what happens when someone is assumed to be not Christian or isn't Christian, and in many cases, white also.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that now with Kamala Harris and the kind of attacks that are coming up against her.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that gets into multiracial America and the United States, and the United States is not alone. I mean, we deal with binary. So everything, it's got to be male or female, you can't, it has to be man or woman, we have a hard time with something else. Off the binary. Same thing, it's black, and race has always been seen as black and white. You know this. This has been part of your life too. We've talked about these things, right? And Senator Harris presents us a different way of looking at biracial, mixed race America, different than President Obama did, right? So it's about people getting their head around it, but I think it's really exciting. I do believe representation matters. And I think that it gives us a chance to engage in these more complex discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. It almost seems like the visual formula for what you lay out for what needs to be done in the last chapter of your book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you've actually said that this book is one that really took you a long time to write. Now, every book takes a long time to write. I'm learning that. I'm learning that as I'm struggling with my second book. But that this one was, it's been sitting with you for maybe decades. And I'm wondering what motivated you to pursue the project, sustain it, and then, how did the argument start and then maybe evolve over the years that you worked on it?
Oh, well, when I first learned about the concept of privilege, I felt a weight had been lifted off me because it explained things in my life that I didn't have language to explain, the experiences I'd had. And I remember learning about white privilege, and I was like, there's something around religion. And I do believe that I'm actually one of the very first to write about Christian privilege. And I wrote about it in my dissertation that I started writing in 1999, graduated in 2001. It was part of a lot of my writings in between. After subsequent writings. And so my ideas have been forming over time. They've been changed. I will tell you that the book would have looked different before the 2016 election. The concepts were the same. The way I was approaching it was almost like it became more urgent. But these issues have been there for hundreds of years. And certainly they've been in my life for my entire life, but I just didn't have the language to articulate what I was going through. So that's one of my great hopes for this book, is that it gives people language to articulate what's going on, as well as make what's often invisible visible.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to speak to the voice in the book. To be honest, it's blunt. It's very, very blunt. There's a lot of information. There aren't a lot of footnotes. It's and there's very straightforward steps. Social justice work is the head, the heart, and the hands. What we need to change the language, change the questions, change the underlying assumptions. A lot of social justice books have stories, and they have personal stories often. Yours, I'm still working my way through it completely, but it's more on, it seems like the narrative tone is more on what we need to do and less about kind of like the story. And
Well, there's stories. There's stories in the middle chapters.
okay.
And but you're absolutely right, Himani. It is about what we need to do. But I have stories, my own personal stories. I have stories from students, stories from that different people have shared with me, that have stayed with me over the years. I have a story in there on my chapter on everyday Christian privilege about being invited to a church in Lynchburg, Virginia, to talk about Christian privilege.
Wow. Cool. Do you have your book with you? I'd love to have you read a brief passage if you feel up for it.
Yeah, actually, I'll have to grab it. I forgot that you were gonna have me do that.
We're casual here.
1 second.
So while Khyati is grabbing her book, one of the things I'll say is that it was published by New York University Press. And as she noted, it's available in a variety of formats, hardcover, ebook, and Kindle as well, and audiobook.
Yeah, so the section I'm going to read is actually I was on a radio show a few weeks ago, and the host asked me to read this section. Hold on, Himani. I'm actually looking for it. I apologize. Okay, I found it. He asked me to read this section because he was really touched by it. As an obstetrician and gynecologist with a medical practice in Cobb County, Georgia, my dad has delivered thousands of babies and had patients from all walks of life. His right hand in the practice was a bright and talented office manager who worked for him for 28 years. Vicki is a white woman of great faith, very involved in her Southern Baptist church community. Soon after she started, members of her church started criticizing her for working for my father because he is not Christian. Although he was a healer, my father was a foreigner and not a churchgoer. So the message to Vicki from the church community was that he could not be trusted. Thankfully, Vicki believed more in God's message than in the community's slanders, and she continued to work for my dad. She and her family defended my father's character, telling everyone at the church that he was a good man. In the end, Vicki prevailed. In fact, after a few years, a new minister joined the church, and his wife also came to work for my dad. Vicki's fellow congregants, white folks, did not know my dad was Hindu and may not have really understood what that meant. They may or may not have realized that he was Indian. More likely, they recognized him as part of an undifferentiated racial other. They knew he was not white and not Christian, which made it unacceptable for Vicki to work with him. Were they trying to protect Vicki from being tainted by contact with my father, or to deny an unwelcome foreigner the help of a good Christian lady? It does not matter. Whatever it was, my father's religious and racial identity made him foreign, different, not normal, and therefore untrustworthy. How about that?
Thank you. Thank you very much. That captures so many elements of the book. So tell me, who is your audience? Given the style that this book is written in, who is the book aimed at?
The book is aimed at, well, so I'm going to back up a little. So I have been talking about a lot of the issues that were in this book as part of different presentations and things over the last decade. And as part of other conversations, other topics. And people were really interested. I would often during Q&A get more Q&A around issues related to white Christian privilege, even though they wouldn't call it that and I wouldn't call it that. So that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. So it's really for folks who, care about social justice, want to learn more, didn't really even consider the religion component, are wanting to learn more about whiteness, as a lot of people are these days. But often many of the books out there around whiteness and white privilege aren't addressing the religion element, aren't addressing how Christianity has helped construct whiteness. Christianity is part of whiteness. So that's who it's for. It's also for, I'm hoping, policymakers and people in leadership positions to help them better understand not only the concept of privilege, but understanding how race and religion intersect and affect life in America.
Okay, thank you. Well, I hope the book is a really big success for you. I'm very proud of you for producing such a fine piece of work, and I do look forward to completing my reading of it in as my as my crazy busy schedule allows. Um, so I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening for our weekly Asian American Herald show. I'm once again Hamani Gupta Carlson, and my guest has been author and educator and social justice advocate Khyati Joshi. The Asian American Herald is a Facebook-based news media outlet dedicated to discussing topics and building community among Asian Americans in the capital region of New York and beyond. So please send us your story ideas and look for the recording of this show on our Facebook page. Have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.